I'm Sarah Nagel. I've spent my career leading research and product development within some of the world's largest brands.
And I'm Chad Reynolds. I'm a serial entrepreneur and the founder and CEO of Verve AI.
And this is AI powered by people.
Each episode will dive into the latest AI developments and talk to an industry leader to help you better understand and utilize AI.
We'll take you inside some of the world's most famous companies and share examples of how AI is improving innovation, consumer engagement, media, and marketing.
No matter what industry you work in, we're going to help you navigate one of the biggest disruptions to organizations and people today.
Hey, Chad, how are you doing? This is our first podcast.
It is. Welcome. No pressure. I'm doing good. It was a long week last week at CES. Was one of the 130,000 people there in attendance. Just get fully immersed. So I've had a full week and then come back to family and then try to launch this week.
Yeah, I'm super excited to talk to all the people we have lined up. I'm not going to say who those people are yet, but I'm super excited about them. Folks within brands, people within organizations. The conversations are going to be pretty awesome. I'm
excited to do this. I mean, a lot of the work that you and I do is predominantly behind closed doors. Where we're doing research for brands, or we're kind of leading, whether it's like board level or C-suite type meetings on kind of the future of different technologies or consumer, or unpacking trends and how to accelerate innovation. For this, it's one of the few times we actually get to kind of research in public and bring some of the things that we can talk about out into the space, and also bring some colleagues and connections and some of the brands we're working with also out here as well, and share some of the shifts that they're seeing as well.
Yeah, pop the hood. We're going to pop the hood.
Let's do it.
Coming up, we're going to be talking to Google Cloud Field CTO Dustin Williams. But first, before we get into that, I'd love to talk about CES last week. You saw a lot. There was a lot that was happening on the floor that a lot of people saw, but you also saw stuff behind closed doors, and you saw some panels and you heard some people talk. I'd love to hear about it because we really haven't downloaded yet.
Yeah, so there have been, obviously you can go to a lot of different trade publications and see what some of the, new products that were launched at the event. I was fortunate to be a part of a few different panels, through Tuesday and Wednesday that, were a chance for different leaders to share what's happening within their organizations. And Monday was awesome. We had we were part of the Salesforce executive welcome event. So we had Jess Sibley, CEO of Time, sit down with some of the leads from Salesforce, Meta, Google, et cetera, to talk about how AI is shifting a lot of the conversations that they're having.
Can you talk about what are some of the shifts that they talked about?
Yeah, so Mark Matthew from Salesforce, talked about how they're helping executives understand, not only what's possible for AI, so what you can do with it, but what is also responsible to do with it. So if you're applying it towards consumer data, CRM, those types of things, how do you work with data in a more responsible way? Using some of the advantages that AI has. We had Evan Spiegel from Snap, talk about how they're leveraging some AI tools. They're one of the few social networks who made the jump from a kind of free platform to more of a subscription-based platform. And they've been able to, go from 0 to 5 million subscriptions. And I think now they're around 7 million subscriptions, to really help people really expand their creativity with some of the tools that if they want to share photos with friends and family, you no longer have to actually snap the picture. You can actually create the picture to try to visualize an idea. So he talked about, how Snap's trying to imagine creativity and using AI around how to do that. But you also had some really interesting discussions around, the future of loyalty. So you had Alicia Tillman, CMO at Delta, talk about really just what is the future of loyalty. So I don't know if Sarah, if
Oh,
you're
lady after my own heart. I love Delta.
are you on Sky Miles?
Oh yeah, have been since 2004, I
Okay.
think.
All right. So, like many brands who launched their rewards program, it was more of a spend to get, type of model. And, she shared around kind of the inversion of that when you think about of a loyalty program as opposed to, spend money and then you get points.
Hmm.
What if you signed up for Sky Miles and then it unlocked, new experiences? So, kind of that shift that they made. I don't know if you were on a plane recently where you wanted to get Wi-Fi, you used to have to pay for it.
Hmm.
And so now if you sign up for Sky Miles, then you automatically have access to Wi-Fi.
Yeah.
So it's just kind of a reframing of things, but it's definitely for the benefit of the end consumer. And, while that example isn't specifically around AI, a lot of the discussions were about leveraging AI to really elevate loyalty, elevate personalized experiences and things like that. So it was cool to see, what was kind of out on the floor, but also what was happening, behind closed doors and the conversations that were happening there.
Hmm. Hey, did you get to see that R1, that rabbit R1 up close?
No, no,
No.
no.
Did you watch the keynote
I
on
did.
that?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a cute little
It's all
device.
coming. Yeah. It's all coming full cycle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It'll be interesting to see what ends up happening with devices like that. Because that was the one that, everyone came out of CES talking about. Okay, so sounded like you had an awesome week. I can't wait to talk about it more. I'm sure there's so much more that we can use to apply what we're doing, at Burvey.
Yeah.
But I want to move on to the next thing that we've seen out in the headlines is the George Carlin AI comedy special.
Yeah.
Did you get a chance to take a look at that?
I haven't. I haven't.
But you know
I,
about what
I
it's
do.
all
Yeah. I
about?
saw
Yeah.
some clips of it. Essentially landed and went right back into like Coco Melon. So not for me, for the
Sure,
kids,
sure,
but
sure.
yeah. But yeah,
Well,
break it down. So what is it?
so it's a 1 hour special, comedy special, but it's all AI generated. I listened to it this morning while I was getting ready and eating breakfast, and it's voice. So you hear George Carlin's quote unquote voice speaking for an hour, talking about a lot of different types of topics, like really some shocking topics as he would have done. It was all AI, and there was visualizations over it. So visualizations were created based on what he was talking about. So it's just like images. It's a couple animations, but mostly images. It was really interesting because I started thinking about a lot of different things, like what is why do we listen to comedy? What is comedy for? Is it
Yeah.
for shock value? Is it to just make us laugh? What is it for? And then the other thing that I was caught by surprise with while I was doing something else is I forgot that it was AI when I was just like getting caught up
At what
in what
point?
it was talking about. Oh, like just in the middle of it, I was just kind of like, he was talking about religion, he was talking about politics, he was talking about like crazy things that were happening in the US. And you just kind of like, I wasn't watching it the whole time. I kind of just had it on in the background and was listening and started just thinking about some of the things he was talking about. Cause it's, in the US right now, it's kind of a crazy place to be. And you get caught up in that and you're like, wait a second, this isn't real. Like, I mean, it's, it is it's an audio file. It's like a real thing, but it's not a real person. And that was what struck me where like, you could do this with any comedian who has passed away. You could do it with any comedian who is alive. You could create a podcast that's all AI generated.
Yeah.
I mean, we could be AI generated right now for all
I
our
know.
audience knows. But it gets really interesting to think about like how it could be used, but then also should we be doing it? Because there's a whole thing too with the George Carlin special is that his daughter was really angry about it. Like it's not him. You're kind of ripping him off. So I don't know.
Yeah. So
I still need to
I
think
guess
about
did
it
it
more. I
feel?
think.
I know some of the, I guess the commentary around it feeling, similar to SNL. If it's parody, if it's
Mm-hmm.
clearly a parody, then it's supposed to be okay.
Yeah.
But I don't know where are the
Where's
what's
the
the line
lines?
for this?
Yeah, this one felt
Like,
more of like a copy, like something he would have said.
right.
I don't know. It didn't feel like, because usually with the parody, there's like, it's like it's a little
It's an
off.
impression.
It's
Yeah.
an impression. There's like you playing into different kind of either features or inflections or things like that. This was just straight up George Carlin.
Yeah.
So I don't know. It was something to kind of process a bit, but it's interesting for sure.
What if you know, like I flew in and I missed Nate Bargatze. Like he was
Hmm.
doing stand up here in
Hmm.
Cincinnati, so a bunch of friends went to that,
Hmm.
and
I love
were
him.
texting me, and yeah, and I wish I could have gone. I probably would have, whether it was like a live stream or even on the plane before before I landed, if I could listen to, I don't know if it necessarily needs to be AI generated, but
Hmm.
I would listen to more and more and more and more content, um, from him.
Hmm.
And so, just curious if you like were that person, would you hand over, your notebooks, your, start to generate new content, on your
Mm.
behalf?
Yeah, I don't know. I think I'm sure there's going to be some that yes are going to experiment, right? There's going to be comedians that are going to need help with either their podcast content or with their new special because an hour special is quite a long time when most stand-ups are up
Right.
there for 5 to 10 minutes. So potentially maybe with some newer comedians, I'm sure there's going to be a lot that are pushing back too, as it speaking about it as an art form. So um, I don't know. It just opens up the possibilities of what you can do with voice, what you can do with people who have passed away,
Yeah.
like in bringing those voices back,
Yep.
introducing them to new audiences. I don't know. I
So,
see positives to it.
for those listening along, we'll include some of the links in the show notes so you can click and can kind of go through and listen as well.
Okay. All right. So for our last topic, I want to talk a little bit about the tech sector. So we're in our second week of January. There's been a lot of layoffs within big brands and organizations: Amazon, Google, Spotify, Discord, Duolingo. There's a number of them. They have laid a lot of folks off, and and you may have heard about this last week at CES. There's a connection to AI, consolidating the workforce, consolidating what, humans need to do. Curious, did that come up at all last week in discussions or on the panels that you attended?
It definitely did. And there was another noteworthy one at Nike, who's going through
Mm.
a pretty
Yep.
large kind of
Oh yeah.
restructuring and reorg. Um,
Again.
that hasn't necessarily gotten a whole lot of play, and it's always been a concern, I think, for what AI signals, but it's really about efficiency, productivity, and as people were talking about the reorganization underway with their people and their teams, it's just making sure that the people that are a part of companies are just very close to the creation of whether it's new content, strategy, dev code,
Mm-hmm.
all different types of things, and then reorganizing the team in a more effective way to get there faster.
Mm-hmm.
I think right now it's all about speed and also kind of customizing the right message. Um, so a lot of the discussion was around, AI is solving this like blank page problem
Mm-hmm.
where you no longer have to stare at a screen. You
Yeah.
can always be creating and creating at such a high caliber that everybody within the company needs to be creating things and synthesizing things. It's no longer kind of one person does one part of it and
Mm-hmm.
passes it along. So it's
Mm-hmm.
just leading to a lot of different consolidation of tasks and activities to, maybe it used to be 50 people and now it's down to 5.
Yeah.
Um, and it's going to be very disruptive to how organizations are structured, but also the different types of roles that exist. And so you've got a large percentage of people who are going to be kind of coming into the workforce from a lot of these larger companies
Mm-hmm.
who are looking to get much more efficient
Mm-hmm.
at how they're delivering products or marketing, media, all different kinds of things.
Yeah, it feels like everyone just needs to get. I know that there's, some folks are cautious and they're not, playing around with the tools as much as they probably should be because it feels like if you don't want to be one of the ones where your job is eliminated, it's more just understand the tools, start to play around with, chat Gemini, like get out there and kind of understand it, because if you understand it, you're then able to understand what it can do. You're able to be the kind of to orchestrate kind of what happens next versus falling behind.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean that's extremely important. I mean, you saw that pop up in a lot of the panel discussions of just trial and error of what things work using different tools and what doesn't. Um, but I think the biggest theme was really just about using it to enhance creativity.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the idea you had in your head, you couldn't articulate in PowerPoint. You can now do it through image generation, or in many cases, you can kind of type it out and it turns into a video. So an insight or innovation or new product ideas, they don't always have to be bullet points.
Mm-hmm.
They can also be expressed through visuals and how you feel. I
Yeah.
think we all know that because we spend a ton of time with like design thinking and empathy, and
Mm-hmm.
visualizing ideas is such an important part of innovation. But now all these tools are essentially kind of democratized to everybody on the inside of the company.
Yeah.
So you truly have, creators on the inside who have a whole different like skills and tool set available now to visualize ideas and even content.
Mm-hmm. It's pretty exciting.
Yeah, it is. It is.
That's awesome. Okay, now let's get to our interview with Google Cloud Field CTO Dustin Williams. We're excited to pick his brain about a wide variety of AI-related topics, and we're especially looking forward to learning more about Gemini and the ever-evolving world of LLM platforms. Are you ready?
I'm ready to go. Let's do it.
Here we go. Dustin, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much. I'm really happy to be here with you guys.
So for the listeners, where are you calling in from today?
I'm calling in from Austin, Texas.
But you're not from Austin,
I am
Texas.
not.
I can tell from that cowboy accent.
Yeah, I'm from Brooklyn. You'll figure that out real quick.
So we're so glad to have you with us, and we're definitely going to get into Gemini, which we're really excited to talk about. But let's start with your background. How did you land at Google, and what does it mean to be a field CTO at Google Cloud?
So my career's had a number of different stages to it. There's been stages where I was an entrepreneur, serial entrepreneur, which basically means I had lots of businesses that failed back to back. Pivot, when I pivoted, it meant I had money left over to go do another thing. So I was in IT for a long time, and then I decided to get back into entrepreneurship. That brought me more into the product world. I had a product incubator in New York City for close to 10 years where we were designing and building products for startups and for agencies.
What was
We
that called?
also, that was called Propulsion. Yeah.
I
So,
remember that.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. It was a geeky thing. So we spent a lot of time building products for people, and then that model came to an end, just like many other business models. A whole bunch of competition flooded in the market. They drove down the price. I couldn't stay competitive in New York anymore, and I went hunting for a job. I got a CTO job down here in Austin, Texas, and I moved down here to prep this business for sale, which I didn't know I was prepping it for sale, but I did. When it was sold, or as it was going to get sold, I joined Google Cloud.
What is the field
Yeah.
CTO like? What do your days look like?
It's the inversion of a CTO in an organization. So, working with our customers and their executive leadership most of the time, helping them to understand what our products can do to help with transformation, to help with strategy, to help with innovation. We do a lot of work along lots of different dimensions there. Sometimes it's just us coming in and saying, here's the potential of what you can do. And other times we're going really, really deep into the business model and we're talking about where they're experiencing problems with growth. And I work with them to try to figure out what a better strategy would look like. And usually a strategy is not just a solution, it is a host of solutions that are all coming together to move the business forward and drive an outcome. So a lot more strategic in that way. But I also do a lot of other things too. I negotiate partnerships. So I worked on a lot of large partnership deals here in Google Cloud. topping off at about 375 million was one of the biggest ones that I got to work on. That requires a lot of complexity about what we bring to the table and what they bring to the table, because a partnership is two ways. So we've co-developed a lot of interesting technologies together with some of these partners.
I have a way of thinking about Google Cloud as a consumer. So it's mostly about storing stuff and photos. And I just, was accessing my holiday address list. But the mission for Google Cloud is well beyond what I use it for, right? So can you tell us about Google Cloud for developers and enterprise usage, and about how Google Cloud has reinvented itself?
There is a very big difference between our consumer part of our business and our enterprise part of the business, as you would imagine. But a lot of the innovative products that we have in cloud are derived from the problems that we had to solve in other aspects of our business. So we have BigQuery, which is this blurring of a line between a data warehouse and a data lake, and many other things coming together. That came out of our need of being able to process data at petabyte scale. So when you solve these ultra large problems first, then you create this foundational solution that you can build lots and lots of things on top of. So we productized those things and we brought them out of Google into Google Cloud as a product. Gemini is one of those things, but we have any number of them. Some of the people who are more on the developer side might be familiar with things like containers and Kubernetes. That also comes out of Google. The whole big data ecosystem is derived out of Google Papers. So we've been investing in these data products and these data solutions for decades now. AI and ML solutions, we've been driving these things. So on our consumer side of the business, it's kind of what you would expect, right? We have advertising, I think that's a lot of your customers, and they're very interested in what their customers want and what their customers are doing, and that generates data at scale. So there is a pretty strong division between our two sides of the company, even though we're intimately connected and we share things between one another. But the enterprise version is a completely isolated enterprise class solution that has security in a totally different way than what you'd expect in a consumer product. Because when you interact with a product as a consumer, you're generating lots and lots of data. Every interaction is generating data. We as marketers, or you as marketers, you're benefiting from that data. So this is not necessarily a bad thing, even though sometimes it's painted as such. But on our enterprise side, we can't have that kind of interaction with our enterprise customers' data. So anything that goes on in that environment is completely isolated, and it is encrypted at every single level, whether it's on disk or crossing the network or in memory in a virtual machine. And that is to make sure that you feel comfortable, or our customers feel comfortable, knowing that we don't actually have access rights to that because everything is encrypted and it's done all transparently. So the big difference there is really about having a lot more control over security and transparency, and these things have they're completely controlled by the enterprise that owns that environment.
Yeah, and Dustin, we have like a short history together, you and I. Over the last few quarters, spent some time to get to know one another, and for listeners, we kind of co-hosted Gen AI Summit for different business leaders in that. But before I jump to what I think a lot of people are interested in on the AI topic, just to kind of double click on the cloud. When I started my first tech company right around 2008. We were really early into cloud. Using a lot of the services from Google Cloud. And many times we were one of the first startups trying to sell into the enterprise. And it took some convincing for people to understand the concept of the files are not on the premises, and the files are in the cloud, and definitely seeing a lot of parallels with kind of what's happening now within AI, and then what happened back then within cloud. So we'd love for you to talk a little bit about that, and then I'd love to jump in to more questions around Gen AI. Just are you seeing those kinds of parallels? Because I know you have a steep history in technology.
I've also been working in cloud. My first company was an internet company, so
Yeah.
I've been working in cloud now for over 20 something years. But I had a very similar experience, right? Like things early on was I was trying to figure out a place to put my WordPress server, and how to make that available on the internet. And it was an incredibly painful process. And, back when you were starting, putting applications on the internet was not really a thing. There was some stuff out there, but most of it was about marketing and content. And right around that time, things started to change and people needed these more complex environments. So, and also Google, where like Google is a cloud company. We were born as a cloud company. So we had to produce these things and we were putting them on the internet to begin with. So a lot, like I said, a lot of this stuff is derived out of these things that we were doing for ourselves. But Google did start by having a handful of services. And there was a change. There's a big sea change in how people, and maybe this also talks to you, Sarah, a little bit about how things have changed in that way too. Initially, Google thought people were just going to show up with credit cards and virtual machines, and use our app engine and Spanner and these other things. And enterprise customers started showing up and they say, this isn't enough for us. We need a lot more. And infrastructure as a service started to become more and more prominent, started to establish, and Google really rapidly expanded out the footprint there. So I'm coming up on my 5th year mark in Google. When I first joined cloud, I think we had something like a few thousand people. And now I don't know what the total number is, but it's like 70,000 people or something to that effect. So just in a handful of years, we've scaled up massively. I mean, we have basically scaled this part of our business in the same way that a hyperscaling unicorn would, with that hockey stick growth. And a lot of changes come. We had 4 products. Now we have hundreds of products, and we have stuff landing so often that I'm almost embarrassed to say this. It's very often that somebody such as yourself will start talking to me about a product, and I go, "Oh, I didn't know about that. Tell me all about it. It sounds cool," you know, because there's just so much. There's nobody can drink from that fire hose.
Yeah.
It's just too intense at this point.
No, it's awesome. And I know with like how we got acquainted was
Mhm,
mostly through generative AI,
mhm,
and obviously there's a ton of excitement going on across the industry. But before we dig into some maybe more nerdy topics that would probably interest me, it'd be
mm.
good if you could maybe just lay out for the average listener, like my mom. Hopefully she's listening, but uh, just how you might describe generative AI to everybody.
There's a distinction when we say generative versus other forms, and there's going to be geeks in your audience who are going to be yelling in
Yeah,
their head, it's not AI. It's like, I agree with you guys. I know it's not AI. It feels like AI, so everybody's calling it AI. It's machine learning. But previous machine learning models, they would statistically predict a thing, but it was an answer to some question, right? Like, what's the price of this going to be tomorrow? And it says statistically it should be 50 cents more expensive. But generative AI is this ability to create something wholly new from instructions. That's probably the easiest way to describe it. And the beautiful thing there about this is, from a technology perspective, it's really one of the most intuitive technologies, even though there's some pitfalls that really trip people up. But it's one of the most intuitive technologies because it uses the things that we all use, which is just natural language. I speak to things. So now you get to talk to the computer. And it's not going to be able to do everything perfectly. And there's definitely a lot of work that we do to create some sophisticated solutions. Bard is quite a complicated product when you know what's going on under the hood. But it enables you to do things that you've never been able to do before. So the beautiful thing is, I had an 80-year-old father-in-law that I was sitting with in Madison, Wisconsin, and he asked me, what is these things? I said, let me show you this. So we sat down and we started creating images. And I was like, describe an image. No, this is a person who was a teacher. He's a beautiful, imaginative person, but this is not necessarily his world. He's never been a visual person. And there we are creating art. And
What'd you
we're
create?
doing, oh, we created tons of things. So one of the coolest things that he got caught up with is that there is an ancient Roman mythology around like this Green Knight type character, which is a bit of a demigod of some sorts. So we started creating these temples with this character, and then we started pushing it, and we started turning him into a knight, and then we gave him like a warrior partner. So this woman who also looks like a warrior, not like the cliche thing, but she just looks like she's battle hardened. And he had the best time of his life because he's never been able to create in that way. So it's an augmentation, right? It's kind of like that exoskeleton that, Ripley used in Aliens that made her punch harder and lift up things over her head that was tons and tons. Same thing with the language models, right? They enable you to create text, but it's important what you give them. So a lot of people are not really fully versed in that. You actually have to give it quite a lot of instructions and examples and stuff to work with, and then it produces these really amazing outputs. And there are some advanced techniques that people are just starting to get into, but when you start exercising some of those things, you can get them to do logic and reasoning, qualitative, subjective analysis, and decision making that has normally just been the domain of people. And that's why when people call it AI, I'm not entirely opposed to it because, yeah, it's not AI, but it feels so much like AI. Like this is the preview into the future. This is the Model T Ford showing up, and you're like, I'm never going to ride a horse again because I got this thing that's so much better than a horse, right? But the big thing there is I think it's really accessible and it's going to be intuitive to people of all ages
Yeah.
because we're all just doing this every day,
I mean, it's kind of
right?
turning everyday people into superheroes of creativity. Um,
Yeah.
just empowering like a whole the next generation of creators. Like
Yeah.
with family members who couldn't write, or like I went to design school, so hence always wearing black. But
Me too.
you kind of felt like as a designer, you felt like you were the person that owned a pickup truck on moving day. You
Yeah.
always got the call to like, can you come help me move?
Right.
So I would always get the call, hey, can you design me a logo and whip it up in a couple hours, or could you design me a website, or could you do all these things? And I think as some of these tools have come out, it kind of puts it back on them to empower them or give them control to create some of these things using their imagination and
Yeah.
machines. So
And I don't think it's going to replace the designers.
right.
I'm already been teaching. My wife's an artist, and I've been teaching this. And at first, she was very opposed to it, like many other artists, right? All the moral and ethical dilemmas that everybody is concerned about, she had. But as I started teaching her this, and she realized it wasn't just, hey, I'm going to make this thing go do a thing, and there's no artistic control over it. Once I taught her how to do that, and then Adobe came out with these features, and now she's creating art at a level that she's never created before. She crested the hill. She saw the potential. She realized that it wasn't a replacement for her. It mostly is going to get rid of a lot of commodity busy work that we all have to do, that nobody likes doing. And then it's going to free us up to do the really hard things.
But it sounds like one of the things that needs to happen is people actually need to get in there and play with it. That's the way
Yeah.
where they, the way that they learn.
Oh, I mean, that is the biggest understatement of the day. This is like the internet landing, right? And one of my first companies was an ISP, and we were really small. It was all dial-up modems, and it took like 5 years after the internet went public for the public to start to come to realize what was going on here, and then another 10 years before a good portion of the population had jumped on board, right? This is happening overnight. And it's if you aren't eagerly embracing this and figuring out where it fits in your workflow and how you're going to use it to make your life better and how to interact with these things, you are going to fall behind so quickly. And, in the course of my career, I've seen these, and maybe you guys have had these same experiences where it's like, I spent 10 years building skills And then you get somebody who just came out of college and they're better than me at these things. And they're like going around circles because they were up to date on all the latest stuff. They had figured out how to do things the easy way. There was more tools and it was easier for them to get these things done. That's this moment right now. And
Mm-hmm.
it's going to change so quickly. These sands are shifting every single day, but the people who are not on board early are going to be left behind, and that gap is going to grow pretty quickly, I think.
Mm-hmm. Chad, that's the
Yeah.
more you know PSA. It's like get
The
on
more
Gen
you know.
AI
Yeah.
or you're
Yeah.
done.
It won't make us obsolete. It will get us into other work, but it will make people more competitive against you, and they might get that work over you,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
right?
and you have to be, I guess, comfortable throwing your previous work away. I know when
Yeah.
we were, we talked about like when I started Verve,
Yeah.
we were very early in, some of the machine learning, more like web accessible, machine learning. So making sense of, lots of, more qualitative data. And so you had to get comfortable that some of those models you were working on, they kind of age out, and not like in 10 years, it might be in 4 months. Um,
Yeah.
so it's
Yeah.
just moving so fast that you gotta, be comfortable throwing your past work away, but not the learnings from it, but just, the code or the way that you're doing it.
Yeah, every business is different there, but you should always be building your business in a modular way. The learnings, the institutional knowledge, the systems, the processes, those are important to the business and you should always be iterating on them and be optimizing them. But we're building sandcastles at the edge of the sea,
Mm-hmm.
and the waves are going to come in and they're going to wash these things away, and there's going to be new opportunities that come with those things. But that's one of the ways that a lot of companies fall behind in general. They figure out a way to do things, and for some reason or another, they have to, or they decide to move forward and they don't look back. And then 10 years goes by, and their business is built on the underpinnings of a world that doesn't exist anymore. So I like to build my businesses in a very modular way, and sunk cost is a real problem. I'm always fighting against sunk cost with everybody because I don't find anything to be untouchable. I think that the moment it is no longer used for the business, you need to move on and figure out a better way. But a lot of people don't like to revisit the things that they worked so hard on. This area here is going to change overnight. All it takes is one scientific paper to come out and some boiler, some code that they put together, and that could wipe out a year's worth of your work. But on the flip side, the other enabler there is I've spent years working on products for like major publishers around cohort analysis and how to figure out the best titles to put out there. What are the themes and trends and concepts that people are most interested in so that we could, use that in order to do better recommendations. Things that took me 2 years to build. Just as I was trying to learn, some of these more advanced techniques, I started doing those things and I got them done in a morning. And not only did I get the same amount of work done that took me and a team full of people to do years, it was 10 times better than we had ever been able to get to. Like
Mm-hmm.
we had this hacky solution that people loved, and I'm looking at a Ferrari version of that thing.
So how did companies start to plan? How do they start to look like, a couple quarters forward or the
Yeah.
next year with tech like this? Is it like a non-plan? Like you just kind of like you're just ready for it because you have this technology, or, how do you think about that?
No, I think that the world is changing in a big way, and businesses have to think about themselves as being a data-driven organization first. There was this mantra that came up, I'd say, during the mid 2000s that companies still didn't really understand to this day. We're all tech companies. Even if you're just making cheese in Wisconsin and you are selling it, those are run by computers. They're scheduled, you're doing billing. If the computers shut off, your business goes down, you're a tech company. So, depending on the size of the business that you're in, you should be thinking about your data strategy as central to your business strategy. because your business stakeholders should be making decisions based on data and not by going with their gut. And it's easier to do that than ever before, but people have to sit down and think about a comprehensive strategy, and your data analytics is a part of it, your data acquisition, how you get people to interact with you and your products so you can acquire the data you need to get the insight to understand what they want and how to give it to them. And then the models that you build on top of these things, whether they're just a standard data model or whether it's a machine learning model, you need to think about it holistically, and you always have to have an understanding of what you're working towards. We are there to drive the business outcomes. If the business has to expand into Europe, then everything that I'm spinning up has to explain what I'm doing and how that gets us into Europe. If I'm just doing a thing and I don't really understand how it's driving value for the business, inevitably that thing either won't succeed or somebody's going to show up at your door and ask you why you're doing that thing, and you're not going to have a good answer for it, right? But this isn't news. This is ROI. It's factoring your ROI and just creating a comprehensive strategy in the same way that you would create a multi-platform, multi-channel marketing campaign, and you'd want to track how that's performing across those different platforms.
Now you just have superpowers behind you to help you do all of that now too.
You do.
This podcast is supported by Verve. While surveys and focus groups limit the amount of people you can hear from, Verve is designed to include everyone. Using the power of video and AI, Verve helps brands talk with 100 times more people, all with the same effort. To see how your team can use AI to speed up the time to insight, sign up at verve.ai for a free demo. Welcome to Verve, where AI is powered by people.
You mentioned models and just some of those like tectonic shifts. I want to shift over to Gemini in the recent launch. And maybe before we dig in a little bit, maybe you can share a little bit about Gemini, how it might be different than other platforms that are out there, and if you could share a little bit about why you're excited about it and why we should be excited about it too.
Excellent. Yes. So the first thing to know there is that all of these large language models are based on an architecture called the Transformers architecture. And I think that's an important thing for people to wrap their head around, because what it does is it transforms one thing into another. If I speak in English, it can translate it into French for me. That was released as a paper in 2018, and it was also released with code, and we also released models that went along with it. So there was BERT and there was T5 and there were some things along the way. But in a very short order of time, in the last, I'd say, year and a half, we've seen a hyper acceleration of this technology, right? And that, I think, is something that we should expect to see in lots and lots of different places. As we create a better version of this thing, we use it to create the next version, which is even better, which we use to create the next version. So at the beginning of the year, we released Bison, which was one of our first kind of forays as a commercial product, as an enterprise product. And that was really great. But these things take a long time to train. They are enormous models, and they take like tens of thousands of GPUs to train. It's a huge orchestration to get that done, and they can take years to train these things. So it's not the sort of thing where it can just go out the door really quickly. So Gemini is a newer architecture, right, than what we've had with some of the other things. And that training data and the tasks that it was trained on, those are all great. There are three sizes of it. There's a nano size, there's a pro, and there's an ultimate. The nano size is going to be available for edge devices like mobile devices. Pro and ultra are going to run in cloud. And they're private to people's environments in cloud. So pro is kind of our mid model, and ultra is going to be the thing that is the most capable, right? It's also the one that's the most expensive, because these things they use an enormous amount of processing power. There's very few models that I've seen that require the resources that these things have, and that's changing very rapidly as well. Especially with this release, we are driving down those things and they are faster. But one of the big exciting differences here, right? So is the fact that they're multimodal. This thing can see, this thing can talk, it can interact and say what it saw in the picture and talk about what it saw in the picture. And then you can add in other things where you can make it create other pictures that it wants. So that's one of the big leap throughs, I think, in this generation. They're starting to be more and more like us, because if you think about all the potential that you get when you can see, when you can show an AI something in an image and interact with it and have it come up with stuff, have it make decisions off of these things, right? That's going to add so many new capabilities to what we can do that we've just never been able to do before. Now, there are other solutions out there. There are other closed source solutions. We work with Anthropic, who has a fantastic series of their own models, the Claude 2 models. They're very famous for having an incredibly large context. They were the first to do that. That lets you just, pretty much have it summarize all of Moby Dick for you, right? So they're partners of us. We have them sold, we sell them in cloud. Then there's a whole bunch of open source models, and those have their own usage. Maybe they're not as capable in some cases, but that's changing really rapidly too. But those give you a lot more control. So Google's and a lot of the other commercial providers, they have a very safe, ethical version of these things, but sometimes that gets away for certain use cases. Like, I've had some situations where we were trying to do things like analysis around really negative news articles that was talking about a lot of violence, and our models are going to block things around violence. So the open source model enabled us to do more around those specific things without the same amount of controls in place. So there's a lot of really great models. OpenAI's got great models too. I use them all. It is like people. I kind of use them for what they're good at. I'm like, this person is going to be good at this. I'm going to get them to help me out with that, and this one's going to help me with this. But now that Gemini's landed, my need to go to other like Anthropic or OpenAI or that's changed a lot for me because it is so capable across the board.
Right.
Yeah. So I'm finding that that Gemini Pro is actually super comparable to GPT-4,
Yeah.
which makes me excited because I know what the big one can do.
Right. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Well, I was excited too, just in the, might seem like a simple thing, but I know it's not. It's just coming out in 3 different sizes.
Yeah.
And I felt like that was not lost on me around how you, as also kind of a manufacturer of hardware, how that might come across through different devices that we interact with on a daily basis, right? So up till now, I'd say the general public, their interaction with models might be through chat interfaces and things like that. But when it's on like on a watch, on a phone, lots of different places where these can show up. And I don't know if you can maybe take your Google Cloud hat off, but just if you kind of back in the entrepreneur side of like all the different things that you could do with this, I don't know, it just seems really exciting.
Yes. Yes, it's extremely exciting. This is science. This is my childhood science fiction. Come on. Some company just came out with the computer on your chest. You can hit the little button. You can hit the button, you can talk to it, it could do things for you. Not just like respond back to you like a chatbot, but you could say, go schedule things for me. Go find me a restaurant. It can go and do things out in the world. That's such a game changer. There's no way to predict what that means. It's like when I got my first my iPhone, right? The whole big screen with no. I looked at this thing and I said, this is great, but it's not much better than my BlackBerry. And because I couldn't see that potential at that moment, it wasn't until people started to blaze a trail and started to show the potential and said, well, actually, you've never had GPS involved in this. You've never had these types of maps. You've never had this ability to know what's going on around you in this proximity. You've never had a camera of this quality before, right? So when you have a legion, thousands and hundreds of thousands of entrepreneurs and creative people looking at these things, inevitably somebody's going to come up with something new and novel, and then we're going to all see it, and we're going to get inspired by it, and then we're going to evolve it, and it's going to turn into something new. So while I have a ton of ideas on where I would take it, and I've also done a lot of work with companies such as yourself. I mean, we've had some phenomenal
Absolutely.
conversations around what the potential of these things are. But if I was to distill that down into one place, to one easy way to think about where I might use this to do something new, I mean, it's such a bizarre thing. It's wherever I used to have a person, wherever I needed a person before. So where, like, if I had a process and I was onboarding a new customer, and at some point we had to get into contract approvals and rules and all those sort of things, and things needed to be reviewed, and those took weeks because you needed to get somebody scheduled to come and do it, and then that would cause a cascade of slowness. Some of the things that I was doing just 3 years ago now around these technologies was completely unblocking that. So we worked with an insurance company, and we helped them to train fine tune models there, and we replaced people who were making decisions as to what was a good claim and what wasn't a good claim. That was, a lot of people would think very negatively. They're like, oh, that's how they get out of paying you. No, what they wanted to do was pay people as quickly as possible, because that was the dimension they were working against, is the pain of my house burned down and I need money to figure out what to do, and your old process took me 3 months. Can we get that down to like days, hours, minutes? And the answer today is yes. A few years ago, 5 years ago, the answer would be absolutely not. You have to hire more people,
Right.
right?
Yeah, I'm going through the same thing right now with like, issuing contracts, MSAs, all those types of things. I'm in like 127-page docs of their terms, and then I've got my terms, and then you need lawyers in the middle,
Yeah,
and we're looking at like a 3-month process, right?
yeah.
Where you could have said, here's our rules, here's your rules, let's build we both understand what we're trying to get at, and how can you craft rules that serve both needs and do it essentially instantaneously.
Yeah, and it also brings other enablers that are non-obvious.
Right.
I worked for law firms, and I built products for law firms. And one of the things I learned, because we were doing a lot of natural language solutions for them as well, the words order matter to the point where a comma in the right place can cost a company, in the wrong place can cost a company millions, tens of millions of dollars, right? Humans are going to look at this thing, and you're going to look right over that comma. You're never you That's just human nature, right? You're never going to pay attention to every single minute detail, because your brain would go onto overload. So you do what's called frame skipping. You skip over the things that you just expect to be there, but in law you cannot do that. This thing will do that for you, and it'll point out things that you would never pick up on your own, because who can read through a 27-page legal document and pick out a comma in the wrong spot? That's crazy. But when you're in a lawsuit, they're pouring over it and looking for that one comma in the wrong place. I mean, that's a bit of a kind of like a big thing out of a tiny little thing there. But this is the sort of enablement we're going to see in a way that it's not obvious how big of an impact it would have, because it seems like it's just doing a simple thing.
That's a little scary to some people, I would say.
Maybe.
And I think, you use the word science fiction. So, Hollywood's created this world where it's like Ex Machina and Terminator and Matrix and things like that, like robots and, something that's going to eat your baby. But with brands, specifically with brands and organizations, you know that they're not allowed to use things like ChatGPT in some situations, and because there's a lot of caution around it. And so, what advice would you give to leaders within brands who are really cautious but curious about integrating AI into the workflow?
I'm kind of the other mindset. If you look at the state of the world these days, maybe we need to take a little bit of control away from the monkeys, like the rest. Like we evolved and we got the world to this place, but we're not necessarily doing a great job in a lot of areas. So maybe we could put robots in charge a little bit more often. We might be better off in some ways. But that's a really good concern that you raised here, because it was a legitimate issue that came up in the news, but it was also very much misunderstood. The issue that arose there was you had people using public, private, confidential business data information, and they were submitting it to a consumer product that had no protections around those things, right? And ChatGPT is a fantastic product, but what you need to do is you need to use the enterprise version of these things for those sorts of interactions. Because whenever I put anything into those enterprise versions of it, and ours isn't the only one, there's others too, then there's an expectation, there's an agreement that that is your business's data, not the other business's data. So just like we should all be thinking of ways to acquire the data that we need to create the solutions we need to create to solve the problems that we need to solve, when you look at something like ChatGPT or Bard, these consumer oriented, they're running at a loss, and that loss is to build a market, but it's also, there is an exchange of value there that's happening. And that exchange of value is you're interacting with this thing, and their engineers and developers are going to be doing analysis of that and figuring out what they need to do to improve the product going forward. So a lot of us have products just like that, right? We own our own products and people interact with them, and we gather telemetry data on how they interact. You just need to make sure that you are in the right product for the solution that you're trying to solve for. And if you're trying to do things with a consumer product in an enterprise, generally that goes in a bad way, right? Don't do things through your personal Gmail. Do it through your business email. Don't do things through Bard that you need to do through business. Do it through your enterprise version of that,
Yeah. I'm sure they're
right?
just slower to adopt this. It moves so quickly,
Most
so,
certainly.
when they first see those products, it's scary. So,
Yeah,
folks will slowly start to understand how to use the products better.
yeah, yeah. I mean, it's just like social media and the internet. It's like we're all still trying to figure it out, and we don't know what right looks like. It takes years for people to figure out what something is going to be, and a lot of failures along the way.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Liken it a little bit of parallels just with like Facebook, is free
Mm.
because you are the product. All of your data, your interactions, all of that's being used to train something that they can monetize in a different way. A lot of the free versions are a similar way, and as like a Google Cloud enterprise customer, there's the security of that you're in a little bit of a closed loop system. Your data secure. It's not going out similar to like kind of cloud back in the day. It's not going out into a public in a public way where you can reach these with different IP addresses and things like that. So
Yeah. And while there's been a lot of negative attention towards those sorts of things, advertising driven businesses, data driven businesses, I think it's good for you and your audience as well as us to all just acknowledge the fact that that is an exchange of value there. It's a really good exchange of value, because we learned very early on nobody wanted to pay for things on the internet. They wanted it for free. And if those people aren't going to pay, we need the advertisers to pay. So, to sit there and kind of bash some of these things is to say, like, it's kind of biting the hand that feeds. Here's this thing that I use and I love, but I don't want to pay for it, but I don't want
right.
anybody else to pay for it either.
So what do you think? I guess over the next few years, just what do you see from it's on the adoption curve um,
Yeah.
within like the consumer world, within enterprise world? How quickly do you think some of these, I guess, products are going to kind of take a hold within companies? Where do you see some of the pushbacks
Mm.
coming from? Because you're obviously in lots of these types of conversations.
Yeah. So there is no holding this tidal wave back. IT had a similar problem back in the mid 2000s, where These companies, their employees were asking for things and IT was saying no, so they just went and paid for a service, and they went out the back door and they got what they wanted anyway, right? So there's no stopping this. There's really just how you embrace it and what type of strategies that you use around this. And what I think is going to happen, at least in the near term, until this becomes superfluous like computers, is that you're going to have three types of adoption, right? You're going to have the augmentation crowd. I'm a marketer. I don't want to write copy. Here's the bullet points. Write this thing for me. Run it through the style guide check. Make sure it's got the right language, the right voice, all of the feel, all of that stuff. Great. Save myself a bunch of time. The market's going to be flooded with commodity content if that's the case, right? So in those people, if you're going to be building value, then you need to shift that work to someplace more important. So the 3 hours I would have taken to write that article, I should be spending 3 hours researching the things that I'm going to use for the model to write that article. Then, so there's going to be people augmenting their workflow with it, and that is going to have certain levels of impact, and it really depends on who the person is. In my own personal work, I have things that take weeks worth of time, and I've wrote applications to assist me here, but I'm doing weeks worth of work in minutes. I showed up at a strategy and a transformation session with one of our, with a major industry leader, and I walked in the door with 40 different things that we should talk about that would have been innovative and transformative for their company. And what their feedback was initially was the first 10 or 15 of those were things that they had talked about, and it took months to get into those conversations. The next things were the things that we all got reprimanded for not talking about. And then there was a whole bunch of stuff that nobody had talked about yet. So that augmentation just radically changed how I worked. And it made me look like some sort of superhero walking in the door because I had 1 day of lead time and I managed to do the work that everybody else who came before me had spent weeks on doing. And then I went past them. So augmentation is going to have some very basic stuff, and it's going also has the ability to get really complex. Then you're going to have the people who are the bolt-on crowd, right? I got a product, I'm going to bolt this thing onto it. We're going to do Q&A over our documentation. We're a Gen AI company. That's table stakes. And next year, nobody's going to give you a high five for getting any of this stuff out the door. More likely than not, people are going to be like, why don't you have this already? Your competitors have it, and I want to work with you and your product. Your product doesn't have it. I find you more painful. I don't like their product as much as I like yours, but I get to do what I need to do much faster with them. I'm going to go with them, right? So the bolt-on stuff is all going to be table stakes. It's everybody chasing after one another. It's all the stuff that's actually super overhyped right now because it's not really a big solution. It's not really anything different. It's just we are taking a little bit of what we did before and making it slightly better. Where you're going to see the biggest winners and losers, right? And it depends on which side you go on, is those companies that embrace this and say, we are going to bring this into the core of our business. We are going to make our decisions with this thing. We are going to build complex solutions. We are going to integrate data systems with it. We're going to feed it. We're going to fine tune it so it's best for our tasks. We're going to have this baked into a data strategy. And that's the sort of thing that's going to enable a new player on the field, maybe not with hundreds of millions of dollars worth of funding. Maybe they got $1 million, but if they got $1 million and they could do what I did with my products and rebuild what somebody else had done in days that took these companies years, now they've not only caught up to where that company was and their competitors, but then they can move faster beyond all of that other stuff. So, but that's just the case with any major technology innovation. The companies that went to the internet first, there was a lot of people that were there too early and they didn't really work it out. We didn't know how to do it. They picked the wrong way. But then you get the Amazons of the world, right? And now look at us. We're talking about how problematic Amazon is, because they were so good at adopting this new technology that to this day, big players like Walmart struggle to compete with them.
So Dustin, what does that mean for the elimination and creation of new jobs?
So this is a part of a larger technology cycle that is called the Luddite cycle, right? New technologies come out and some people are going to be displaced in those technologies, right? We get it from the Luddites, which were they were fighting back against some of the automation around the weaving in industrial England, right? So there's going to be those people who have that knee-jerk reaction of something that says, this is an existential threat to the value that I have in the world, whether it's my labor capital, whether it's my business's value that I created, and they're going to radically reject it outright because it's such an existential threat to them. But then so some jobs will go away, but the things that will go away tend to be the stuff that was commoditized at that point anyway, right? It's the stuff that's low paying. It's the things that you struggle to find people to do. But this also has the ability to unset some of those things that are more complicated, that, is not necessarily just commodity work. But the thing that we've seen in every major
Can I ask, like what, in your mind?
Well, decisioning, for instance, right? If you are a leader in a company and you have to make a decision, what you make your decision on is what people manage up to you, right? So you're getting this skewed perspective of what the world is because the people who have to go do that work and advise you, depending on the size of the company, the bigger it is, the more politics there are, the more, fiefdoms that you have where people are trying to protect their power structures. And, they don't necessarily give the executive or the leadership team who has to make these decisions the best insights. This is completely neutral, right? This is also better than a management consultant when you think about it. You walk Deloitte or Accenture or BCG, all great companies filled with super smart people, but they're also smart enough to know you don't walk up to the CEO and say, every idea you have is terrible, you shouldn't do those things. They know their job is to create a proof that that CEO is right, right? And enormous amounts of time and effort and opportunity were all lost to these sorts of things. This is a neutral agent. It is not going to do that. It is going to tell you what is the truth to some degree. And that's going to be depending on the solution that you build and how you define truth in that solution, how you protect truth in that situation. But the fact that you can sit down with a machine and say, I have a problem, I need help, what is this thing? It can be as basic as, I want to get into cheese making. What are the things that I need to learn? What are the steps? What's the equipment? And it's going to tell me what that is. But what happens when you say, go into the news and pay attention to what's changing in my world? And I've identified, like you, AI, have identified that one of my competitors bought up one of my other competitors. What does that mean to my business? Go in and do an analysis. Tell me about what their portfolio looks like now. Tell me about what their strengths and weaknesses look like now. What do I need to do to defend myself against these things? I can do that today. It's not easy. This is the hardest things I've ever built in that way to get to that level of complexity. So it's not going to be the thing that just anybody can do. This is not the stuff that computers were supposed to do for us, though. This was the stuff that they were supposed to be more like, Robbie the robot that would walk around and do simple tasks for us. They were never supposed to create. They were never supposed to make decisions. That was literally science fiction stuff. Even geeks like me who are super passionate about this and root for the AIs to win, we didn't see this coming in this way, not in our lifetime. But it's here today to some degree, and it's going to get better and better and better. So what happens when your hardest decisions can now be made with assistance that you've never had before? And you can have something augment and give you experience that you don't have, or a perspective that you don't have.
Thank you to Dustin Williams for a fascinating conversation. He had to jump off before we're able to say goodbye, but he left us with a lot to talk about. Chad, what are your biggest takeaways from the interview?
How rude of him just to jump off like that. That's my biggest takeaway. No, I mean, there are a couple things. So the first one was just the leaps that AI is taking from a multimodal perspective. Up till now, I think the regular consumer's experience with AI has been mainly through like a chat interface. So I had to type something out and get something returned back. I think with AI having multiple senses, be able to see things, is just going to open up a totally different experience for what's possible.
Mhm.
So I'm really excited about multimodal and what that enables. And also just it's not lost on me the different sizes of models that are coming out. You have kind of your enterprise, ultra premium, huge models, but then you also have tiny little nano models you can put into watches or your oven. So
Would you
they're
put it in your oven?
yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, do I like getting up and checking the oven to see if something's
Yeah, okay.
finished?
Yeah.
Like I would absolutely put a little mini camera in there and AI. I don't want to set the timer. I mean, I think if there was it could detect what it was, and it could start the time, and it knows the way I like it. Just like
That
you
would
do
be
a
pretty
frozen
rad.
pizza, right? Like
That would be awesome.
yeah. So I think there's all these little things that are just kind of productivity hacks that I think will be really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
What about you?
Well, I was just thinking of Dustin. He's in the perfect position for his personality. Like when we were talking about that science fiction stuff, he's like, people are scared, but he's like, this is awesome. Cause he's like, we need to take, cause there's a lot of things that the machines should be doing, or what do you call it? The robot should be doing,
Yeah,
taking that away from us. So I think that, he's perfect for that position and, that company to be able to envision the future and be comfortable with it and to enable, help other people become comfortable with it also.
absolutely. Yeah.
I learned a lot, and I hope that our audience has learned a lot from the discussion as well.
Yeah, and full disclaimer, like Verve and Google have been collaborating a lot over the last few years just on what's possible using AI, especially when it comes to video, transcription, synthesis, sense making, all these different tools. So really excited also for Dustin's help on some of the things that we're working on as well.
Awesome. Well, that's going to do it for our first episode of AI Powered by People. The show is produced by Steve Berkowitz and brought to you by Verve. Thanks for listening, and we'll be back next Tuesday.
Yes, we will.